Thanks for joining the talk this afternoon to have a chat about cloud. We've got a lot of ground to cover and we hope that we can share with you some insights that we've learnt from working with clients over the last few years in terms of deploying ArcGIS into the cloud. So we're going to take a look at some deployment patterns. We'll chat briefly about security because we could spend hours talking about security, as I'm sure some of you know. And we'll leave you with some Easter eggs. And I have been informed by people much cooler than me that that's the term you use for tips and tricks. So we'll see. Keep an eye out for them. Let's jump in. So I guess cloud has been around for a long while, and we saw the introduction of AWS with compute and storage in the market in 2006. But over the last few years, we've really seen the growth in terms of providers in the Australian market, with Azure in 2014, Alibaba 2016, and then Google Cloud Compute more recently in 2017. And at Esri Australia, we've been working with clients to put GIS in the cloud since about 2013. And over 5 years of working with clients, we've seen some distinct trends at a really macro level in terms of cloud deployment and the value proposition that goes along with it. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about those because they are really critical to the cloud solution that you end up with. When we talk about cloud with clients, we really spend a lot of time talking about 4 pillars of value. And the first is scalability, and it's probably the most common that we associate with cloud. So the ability to be able to flex your environment up and down as your organisational needs change. So as your users change, as you need to add new technology, or as your data changes. And we all know from seeing Dr. Ahmed's talk this morning that that's really, it's coming to the forefront in terms of how we manage large volumes of data. And so we can answer questions like how do we create more capacity in a peak client season, or how do we accommodate more users if we have a transient workforce, and how do we avoid waste? The second is flexibility, and that's really the ability to be able to deploy quickly so you can have an environment that is agile. So you can add new technology, you can stand up POCs if you have to prove a capability to your business, and you can turn production environments on and off, or non-production environments on and off as you have project work scale up and down. And flexibility flows over into how you fund your solution. So you can pay month by month up front, and you can move your budget from CapEx to OpEx, which is a really big driving feature in terms of IT in the cloud. And so when you combine scalability with flexibility, as GIS and IT professionals, we're provided with a really powerful combination of benefits that allow us to be highly responsive to our organisation's changing needs. The third pillar that we spend a bit of time talking about is obviously cost, and the fact that in cloud you really can deploy for what you need, which eliminates waste and improves the ROI back to your business. One lesson that we have learnt in working with clients over the years is that if you're going to start talking to your business about cloud deployment, you really need to think about the total cost of ownership from the start of a project. So when you started a new IT project within your business on-prem all those years ago, what were the total costs? And there are calculators out there that can help. We've got some in our resource pack that you can access later on. And then lastly, risk. So do you need to provide your organisation with high availability for improved business continuity? What failover and redundancy do you need? And if your internal infrastructure fell over, how quickly could you respond? But how quickly do you need to respond? All questions that impact the type of architecture that you end up with. And cloud can help provide some of those answers. And these value pillars are really important because they form the foundation of your deployment, which Todd will touch on in a minute, and the technical architecture that you implement. So you've arrived at going into the cloud, you've made the decision you're going to venture into the big blue, and in working with clients, we've really seen 2 very distinct paths at the macro level to cloud capability. And they're trends that are echoed by our partners like Amazon and Microsoft. So you might have heard them talking along these lines before. And we break them really broadly into commercial and to government. but they have very distinct differences. So commercial, when they talk about cloud capability, tend to move an entire capability, a system, an entire workflow, a complete IT infrastructure, because the value of cloud for them is driven by transformational change. They either need to drive cost savings to meet a huge change in products or services that they're offering, a change and a flex in workforces, and they go pretty big with their implementations. They have pretty aggressive timelines because they're looking to secure competitive advantage that's supported and underpinned by cloud. Government, on the other hand, we've seen take a more of a cautious approach to cloud. And that's rightly so when you think about their driving imperatives. So stability of service, community confidence. And they tend to start with a very specific application or use case. They test, they manage, they ensure that stakeholders are comfortable and that their risk level is right. And then once they have that level of confidence, they'll start to expand their footprint and use of cloud. And I guess the real key point here is that both end up in the same place. So the same benefits and the same outcomes, but the journey is slightly different. And the reason that I put that out there is because that means the business case is different. The language, the driving attributes, the timelines, and then that all flows through into the architecture, and Todd will talk a little bit more about that. So at a macro level, these are some of the considerations that you need to think about if you're starting to talk with cloud in your business. And now I'm going to hand over to Todd, and he's going to take you through some specifics of deploying GIS in the cloud. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Kate. So what we've seen over the last 5 years, working from a cloud services perspective with our customers, is that there's really 4 stages of cloud adoption that our customers go through. So we've got the project phase, or the project stage, where customers just starting a little bit cautious, getting a feel for what the cloud offers in terms of how to operate in that environment, how to deploy, how to manage, how to operate, and maybe just dipping the toe in the water in terms of security and working out what the elements there that they need to be aware of, etc. The next stage is working towards a hybrid model. So building a bridging strategy to have cloud-based infrastructure, as well as integrating with cloud-based infrastructure from their on-prem systems as well. And then they start to replace some of their workloads and move those to the cloud gradually. Eventually they reach more of a scaling stage where they're starting to, implement more of a centre of excellence within their organisation on how to deploy to the cloud, what the frameworks are to manage systems within the cloud, and they start to migrate the remaining workflows that they've got to the cloud itself. And then they reach sort of nirvana, which is really moving towards that cloud first or even cloud only strategy of moving systems into the cloud or provisioning new systems within the cloud first, rather than going and putting in on-prem first and then migrating to the cloud after that. From that perspective, it's been really interesting to see that over the last couple of years, both Azure and AWS have started to see that customers need more help in terms of their cloud adoption processes and frameworks. So in particular, I'm sort of looking at the Amazon cloud adoption framework here, but it's quite good in the sense that it really gives customers a sense of not just driving change in the cloud by technology alone. It really calls out those pillars of, the business perspectives as well as the technical perspectives. So it looks at, the business and what is the strategy for the cloud? What's it going to cost us? What benefits do we want out of it? As well as the people. So what people do we need to find to help us build these cloud systems, and how do we attract and retain the right people? And how do we communicate as an organisation to make sure that we've got all of the right stakeholders talking at the right times? And then obviously we've got our governance, so making sure that our project management, our program management, and just the management of our portfolio of systems is correct. Beyond that, it is the technology, right? So we're thinking about things like the platform. So how do we provision software? How do we provision infrastructure within the cloud? And how do we architect the right solutions? for that to use for that infrastructure. In addition to that, how do we start developing applications in a different way? They're slightly different from what we do now on-prem, so we need to adopt and adapt to that approach. Security, obviously, big subject, as Kate called out already. And then we've got operations. So when we're in the cloud, we might have to manage systems slightly differently. Maybe we've got different ways of monitoring systems, different change control processes that we need to adopt, and things that we need to do just generally from a business continuity perspective, so backups, patching, etc. So the first sort of Easter egg that we've identified in terms of cloud adoption is that the customers that do the best in terms of migrating to the cloud have a really big focus on change management among their people. So it's all about communication. What are our stakeholders needing? What are our other staff needing to do to meet those requirements and those expectations? The other things are really infrastructure provisioning, so using configuration management systems such as Chef or Puppet or Ansible to manage your infrastructure in a way that it's immutable. So you're deploying new infrastructure and just configuring new config for those systems. And then obviously we've got security, the big subject. We'll talk about security a little bit later. So let's jump into deployment patterns. I think with deployment patterns, before I get in there, we talk a lot about our case studies for cloud services now. We're based in AWS, but ArcGIS Enterprise as a platform has equal support for both Azure and AWS. So don't be too put off if you're thinking more about an Azure route. So the first case study that I want to talk about is really that initial project stage. So we've got a number of state government departments and local government authorities who have wanted to stand up public websites so they can do public engagement, so provide public-facing maps so that their citizens can see information easily. So in these approaches, what we do is, I might just jump down here for a bit, but you can see that what we do is we actually term this a siloed site approach. So we tend to have a scaling instance, a staging instance that customers deploy their map services to. And then from that point, the customer requests that a promotion process be enacted. At that point, we take an AMI, so it's just a machine image of that staging server, and then it gets deployed out among a number of servers. So for high availability or for scaling load, those machines scale out. So each machine is a clone of the other. In that way, we can manage configuration fairly easily. We can publish whatever we want to the staging instance, put our map services and applications on that, and then be sure that each instance that we spin up is identical. The good thing about this too is that the servers have all the information and data that they need at their disposal on each server, so it's close to the application server. We can use other enterprise geodatabase approaches to share data between instances if we want to, but that depends on the customer and how they want to manage their data. So one of the Easter eggs with this one is that if you take this approach, you really need to manage session affinity on the load balance itself. Because while the majority of services on ArcGIS Server are stateless, there are a couple that have inherent state, like geoprocessing services and geodata services. The next case study is really customers who want to do enterprise GIS themselves within the cloud, so have a private environment that they're accessing alone. In these cases, we utilize some of the features within the ArcGIS platform to deploy config and content to S3 and DynamoDB. And we just provide really the ArcGIS platform on infrastructure within the cloud itself, within a VPC that customer alone can access. In these cases, the Easter egg is that we found that over time, it's harder to actually scale out an ArcGIS server tier that's in a conjoined site, because you've got to add a machine to the site on the fly, and that can be difficult to do when the servers are under load. So what we tend to do now is we actually scale up rather than scaling out. The other thing is that we can use cloud stores to actually store our content and even raster data within S3 buckets, or in Azure it's in blob storage. So let's talk about data now. So customers often ask, where should we put our data if we want to deploy to the cloud quickly? In these approaches, we need to have our data as close as possible to our application server. So there's a number of processes that we can take. So we can look at geodatabase replication if we're versioning our data sets. So you have the combination of your maintenance and publishing database, where your maintenance database would be on-prem and your publishing database would be in the cloud. So in this approach, you could use geodata services from ArcGIS server itself to perform the geodatabase replication. If you're not using version datasets, then you could take a similar approach, but use, say, an ETL process to extract the data out of your maintenance database on-prem, push it to S3, and then have an equivalent server in the cloud that's pulling from the S3 bucket and applying to your enterprise geodatabase in the cloud. The other approach that some customers are taking now is to look at actually having their editing sessions within the cloud itself. So putting session hosts on the cloud that we can serve up through a technology called Upstream, which provides a low latency connection to desktops. So we've got a number of desktop patterns that we actually adopt in cloud services. I'll kind of stream through this slide pretty quickly, but there's 4 main patterns we use, based mainly on different pros and cons of each type. So EC2 is great for one-off workloads and scaling up and can be managed as an SOE, but it has a slower visual latency, so it's not good for editors in the cloud. Workspaces is better for editors in the cloud, but you can't manage it as an SOE, so we tend to not deploy too many of those. Upstream's a good balance of both, where we can have low visual latency for editors, and we can manage those session hosts as SOEs. And if we want to go like big end-of-town enterprise environments, we can use session hosts which are fronted by Citrix storefronts, etc. So the approaches that we're tending to favour now is really EC2 for those scaling workloads and those one-off workloads, as well as Upstream for editors within the cloud. I'll talk briefly about security. So security is just about managing risk in the cloud. The important thing to be aware of is really that shared responsibility model. So if you're standing up your own systems within Amazon or within Azure, you need to be understanding the actions, the controls that those platforms are actually doing for you in terms of security, because there will be controls that you need to implement for your own data. So likewise, if you're integrating with cloud services from Esri Australia, we'll be applying security within the platform itself, but you'll have to manage access and giving users access to the platform. Like I said, it's all about risk management. So we identify the risks, we look at the likelihood and consequence, and then we apply mitigations depending on what we can do within those vulnerabilities. We need to have people that can look at the risk and somewhere on that continuum of risk from no risk to very risky, determine whether that data and that workflow can be deployed to the cloud or not. And really, that approach of security by design, so baking security into everything you do from the very beginning. So as you're building systems, as you're building applications, making sure that the source code's secure, making sure the way you're deploying it's secure, making sure that the information's secure in the database, etc. So I'm just going to hand it back to Kate now to sort of talk about the things that we've learnt today and a few other, just to summarise what we've gone through.
A lot. Thanks, Todd. So I guess what you can see on screen here are some of the technology stack that we use in the cloud services space for a GIS deployment. So I guess the technical components that make up our cloud architecture, but obviously there's many, many more depending on, whether your pillars of value are flexibility, scalability, etc. And we talked about those a little bit earlier. And I guess to finish up, what I really want to come back to are these 4 key pillars of value for cloud, because in working with our clients, the most successful deployments are those where the client understands which pillar is the priority or what blend they need from each different pillar. And what I mean by that is you can have a solution that's, highly available, fully flexible, scale up and down, but that obviously changes the pillar of cost and then the pillar of risk in terms of how you manage that environment. You might just want a simple application in the cloud that's public facing. And so the risk pillar changes because it's open data and you want people to be able to access it from any kind of device. So being able to prioritise those 4 pillars of value and really answer the question in terms of why is your organisation doing this is really important, because as you would have seen from what Todd talked about, it flows down into your technical architecture, your security posture, and all of the other questions that you need to answer to operationalise a system in the cloud. So I really do encourage you, if you're starting your cloud journey, to think about these things. And obviously, if you're on your cloud journey, to make sure you're answering these questions. And we couldn't finish without giving you a few resources. They will be available in the slide deck after the presentation, so please don't worry about trying to copy them all down, but these are resources that we think are valuable in terms of talking about cloud and thinking about cloud. And we'll finish up with some questions. Otherwise, Todd and I will be on the Esri Australia booth after this if you want to come and have a chat with us one-on-one.